Welcome back to the Jupyter Notebook lecture. In case you're new to Jupyter Notebook systems in general, this lecture will briefly cover the basics. You can feel free to skip this lecture if you're already familiar with Jupyter Notebooks. I'm sure if you've already taken one of my other courses on Python or data science, you already have more than enough experience with Jupyter Notebooks in general. In case you're unfamiliar, let's briefly go over the Jupyter Notebooks. Jupyter Notebooks use a .ipynb, which stands for IPython Notebook, file format, but they can be saved to a .py file. That way you can open them up with any IDE or any sort of text editor. They can even be saved to HTML and PDF formats. You can't double-click a .ipynb file directly to open it. In order to do that, you need to do it through the command line. So all you have to do is open up your terminal and type Jupyter Notebook. Then you'll have the Jupyter Notebook viewer and you can navigate to wherever your notebooks are stored. You can always use CD to navigate to the terminal beforehand. Okay, let's jump to a Jupyter Notebook to discuss a few key features. Alright, so once you type in Jupyter Notebook into your terminal, you should see something that looks like this. Now the files or folders that you see here are going to be different depending how you did this. If you're running it locally, you should see something that says localhost 8888, etc. If you're running this on maybe an Amazon EC2 instance, depending on what installation instructions you followed, you'll have a big EC2 line and then 8888, etc. But either way, regardless of how you're actually doing this, you should see a screen similar to this one, and you can see what folders look like, what a typical notebook file looks like, and here you'll see other files. For example, some MP4 file. Now, obviously the Jupyter Notebook can't really open this well. So let's go over how you would create a new notebook and a couple of special features that hopefully convince you that Jupyter Notebooks are going to be really useful when learning something. So you'll come over here to New, you'll click on it, and you can see here I can create a new text file, a new folder, a new terminal, but more importantly, a new notebook. Now underneath notebooks, I have various options because I'm running this on my own local computer. In this case, I'm actually running this on a Mac, not a full Ubuntu or Linux-based system. But I've specialized my notebook to have multiple languages, so I have R and Scala available. Most likely, if you follow the instructions, you'll have either just Python 2 or Python 3, or you'll see something that says like Python Conda root or Python default. As long as it says Python somewhere around there or Conda somewhere around there, that's totally fine. So just click on that one, and you can review the installation instructions for whatever system you're working with. And then that will start a new notebook. Now, with this new notebook, I want to show off just a couple of neat features. For example, if you want to run code, you have these cells. So I can say 2 plus 2 or 2 plus 1, 2, and do Shift Enter. And with the Shift Enter, I can immediately see the output. So that's going to make your learning process really nice when working with the Jupyter Notebooks. You have this input and direct output. What's also really nice is you can write little notes for yourself. So you can change these to what's known as a markdown cell. So you just come up here, change it from code to markdown, and that changes the cell. Notice how it doesn't have that in anymore. And then I can just write something like, this is a markdown cell, notes for me. And then I can do Shift Enter, and notice what happens. It's just regular text. So that's a way you can leave little notes for yourself, and these markdown cells are prevalent throughout the lecture notes. That's basically my way of leaving little notes for you that explains a lot of the code. And this does support full markdown syntax, so if that's something you're familiar with, for example, you can put in hashtags here that actually changes the size of the font, etc. So that's general markdown text. That really has nothing to do with this course, but if you know it, it's available for you there. And if you want to change the notebook title, you just click here on Untitled, and then say something like My First Notebook, etc. Alright, so that's really the basics of what you need to know for the Jupyter Notebook. A lot of this was already covered throughout the installation lectures, so I'm sure a lot of this is reviewed to you. The last two things I want to mention before we end this lecture are two really powerful features of the Jupyter Notebook, and that's getting documentation string help and the list of the methods available for an object. So let's actually show you. If I have an object, x, and it's going to be a string, and then I run Shift Enter to actually define that, I can type in x, and I see the output of the string. But strings have methods available to them, so I can say something like dot upper, and then I uppercase the string. Now you may be wondering, well, how the heck am I supposed to know all the methods available? Well, luckily Jupyter helps you out. So if you have an object that's already been defined, Remember, you have to run a cell in order to define the object. So x was defined up here, and I ran the cell. Now that it's defined, I can say x dot, and I hit tab on my keyboard, and I can see all the various methods that are available to me here. So lots of methods. A lot of these you won't be using. In fact, most of them you won't be using. But with tab, you can see all the ones that are available to you. So you don't really need to memorize anything. So that's something that's really nice about the Jupyter Notebook. A lot of IDEs already do this sort of thing, but Jupyter Notebook does it as well, and it's quite helpful that everything's happening right here in front of us. We see the input and the output. We see the tab, all the methods. It's really nice. Now, the other thing I want to show you is the ability to see documentation strings for functions themselves. So if we use a built-in function, such as sum, I can do Shift-Tab after this to see the documentation string. So I see the doc string here and some description of what this function does, returns the sum, etc. Now again, the function needs to be defined in order to actually see the documentation string for it. So if you're working with your own custom function, make sure you actually run the cell first that defines that function in order to see the documentation string later on. Alright, so that's really all we need to know. If you ever want any more help with Jupyter Notebooks, just come over here with help, and there's lots of useful things here, such as the keyboard shortcuts, which I was kind of just discussing, as well as general notebook help, more stuff on Markdown in case that interested you, and a lot more stuff about certain libraries with Python that you can use for data science and machine learning. Alright, Jupyter Notebooks are super popular in Python for data science ecosystem in general, so I hope you learn to love them as well. If they're not your thing, no worries, I understand, but feel free to explore them. Thanks, I'll see you at the next lecture.